It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. It's Take Command Podcast. Craig Hoffman, Logan Paulsen. Looking ahead to this weekend's NFC East showdown between the Eagles and the Commanders. Can't wait to dive into this, Logan. Going to be a lot of fun. We have a lot of meat on the bone left on the Commanders' defense and their performance from the Saints and how that parlays into this game. Real quick, I did want to mention off the top one item of housekeeping. We tend to keep things very, very football-centric on this show, but it doesn't mean that's the only thing going on in the Commanders universe. The RFK Stadium bill is a constantly evolving huge deal. And it looked really good earlier in the week. Now, all of a sudden, it could be on the chopping block again. And we are following that on the Team 980 live, on 106.7 The Fan live. I had a tremendous interview with Aaron Cox, who is a politics reporter from the Washington Post, on my show on, Wednesday. So if you want to go to the Hoffman Show podcast and check that out, we'll probably have more coverage on Thursday and Friday's show as well. It's really wild, Logan. I know we're DC's team and all, but the fact that the future stadium site for the football team is caught up in the big, giant continuing resolution to fund the government, but that's where we are, and we're following it because it's important, and where this team plays next is obviously really important to everybody. But that's probably not a topic we're going to wind up talking about a lot on this show, but one that I know a lot of you care about. So the Hoffman Show is a good place for that personal recommendation. But also, of course, Sheehan, Russell, Grant and Danny, JP, and B. Mitch, and the Junkies are all covering it as well. Junkies actually had Mayor Bowser on the other day, so you can check that interview out in their podcast feed as well. Okay, into the football we go, Logan. And the Commanders' defense had a pretty interesting day against the Saints. They obviously shut them out in the first half, give up 19 points in the second half. They get the 2-point stop. That is fantastic. Giving up the 19, not nearly as good. And now you are facing a Philadelphia offense that had one of its best performances of the season its last time out against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Just a devastating final drive that ate up basically the entire fourth quarter. And Pittsburgh's one of the better defenses in the league. This is the second time these two teams have matched up. What do you think the key matchups are here the second time around, and how different is it than the first?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many really critical ones. And I think, even in what you said there, just kind of reviewing what they did versus Pittsburgh, how we played versus New Orleans, there's just a lot to touch on. So let's hit the first thing, maybe most important thing, is I think that, obviously the Pittsburgh game is really interesting. That's a good defense, and obviously Philly was dominant in that game. Pittsburgh they have the highest percentage of single high coverages in the NFL. They have a very high percentage of man-to-man coverage, and traditionally throwing the football against teams that do that are kind of in the same coverage structure tends to be a little bit easier, especially when you have people in man-to-man situations that you trust, right? So like people say, oh, well, the Commanders had a harder time throwing the football, but again, we don't have A.J. Brown, we don't have Devontae Smith, we don't have guys that can consistently win one-on-one matchups. And they do, right? They have Saquon Barkley, they have tight ends that can win one-on-ones. And so I think that some of that production in that game from a passing standpoint specifically is reflective more of what Pittsburgh was doing and their answers. And I don't think Pittsburgh's defense played badly. I don't think Pittsburgh's defense played badly. I think what you're seeing from Philadelphia over the last couple weeks is really the truest definition of a defensive football team. And what I mean by that is their defense is playing so well that they can kind of sit in this game flow where it's like we can run the football, we can be patient running the football. We don't have to get outside of our comfort zone ever offensively, right? Even if we're down by three or four points in the first quarter, first half, we don't have to panic, we don't have to rush because the defense is not going to let any more points score, and we can run the football, we'll find explosive play, we'll get back into this thing. And I think that's the thing that's so interesting about watching them is they have not really been stressed because the defense is playing so well. So that's one thing. And then now let's go back to the New Orleans part of it. And so one of the things about New Orleans is that I really enjoyed watching, and I did a breakdown of this with Coach Quinn on the Game Plan show, which comes out before the game on Sundays, and just talking about the coverage structures. They ran a little bit of cover 3, they ran a little bit of cover 2, they ran a little bit of man coverage, and just how good they're getting at it. And then how good the coverage structures are getting, coupled with how effective the rush is. And I think that's been something that's been really cool to watch, kind of the frenetic energy of the front. And so I think this defense presents more issues from a coverage, and I don't want to say rush standpoint, but definitely from a coverage standpoint than the Pittsburgh Steelers do. So I do think that that's going to be something that is going to bode well for the Commanders. And I think when you look at the two perimeter pieces, the Commanders have Mike Sanders still, and obviously Marshawn Lattimore. I think there's a really cool opportunity for Joe Witt Jr. to even further diversify that coverage portfolio. Because again, when you look at Marshawn and watching him and how he played, like, he just brings a level of athletic dexterity, confidence, understanding of how to play the position that gives you some more flexibility in the back. And I'm not saying they're going to play man all the time or cover 3 all the time or cover 2 all the time, but because of his unique skill set and how talented, strong, athletic, and smart he is, it lets you kind of diversify what you're doing. And I think some of that stuff's going to be really, really important versus the Eagles, because again, they're a defensive football team, and they run the ball really well offensively. And so if you can kind of throw a monkey wrench in that run game with some more aggressive coverage structures, there's an avenue here for them to have a very successful day defensively.
Yeah, I think it's so hard, the Eagles, in terms of trying to game plan for them, because if you're game planning for the quarterback, what you would do is just say, we're going to zone it up. We know we're not going to be able to get to you in a major way because your offensive line is amazing. We also don't want you scrambling. So we're just going to zone it up. We're going to make you find holes. We're going to make you be precise. We're going to make you be decisive. And that's how we're going to play you. We're going to be in a bunch of too high stuff. We're going to make sure that A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith don't get over the top. And bang, we're done. Like, you're toast. Problem is, if you play a bunch of light boxes, they will not only run the ball down your throat with Saquon Barkley, which, they could run the ball down your throat with any running back because their O-line's so good, and now you're giving them good space, good angles, all that kind of stuff. Now you add in maybe the most explosive player in the entire sport that you're actually handing the ball to. So if he slips one tackle, like, you're talking about a potential 60-yarder. But also talk about numbers in the run game. They'll run quarterback sweep or quarterback power with Jalen Hurts. And now not only do they have the good numbers if they handed it off, but they have an extra blocker in Barkley or Kenneth Gainwell or whoever, because Jalen is now the ball carrier. So they present that really basic football conundrum of, do you try to support or stop the run with numbers? Do you play back? And obviously, if you're playing the run game, like, you probably play a bunch of man-to-man on the outside, load the box. But we've discussed why, like, that isolation basketball strategy is not going to probably play out in your favor because of how good the receivers are. And so that to me is the challenge for Witt is, do you keep Jalen Hurts guessing to where he can't just pick his matchup and just wait and then fire when he's ready, while also making sure that you have the support against the run to make sure that Saquon doesn't ruin your day, which they did for 3.5 quarters last time, and then Saquon very, very, very much ruined their day.
No, I think that's 100% right. And again, I don't think it needs to be man coverage. I think when you look at the New Orleans game, I think the way they're running cover 3 right now, you feel really good about it, right? They kind of start in this split safety looks like 2, maybe quarters, and then, Jeremy Chin or Quan Martin will rotate down into the box on the snap, and you can get into some different coverage looks. And I really think that might be a solution, a viable solution, because one of the things about cover 3, again, when Dan was in Seattle, that made it so effective was you're always playing an 8-man box, basically. And I think you had really good corners on the perimeter that could kind of knew how to funnel to the middle safety. You had a safety with some range. And again, that's one of the best secondaries of all time. So I'm not saying that's what they can do all the time, but I think definitely that's something that I would kind of look into, is like, how much cover 3, how much aggressive quarters can we play, again, to make sure that safety's thinking run support while also kind of maintaining a good coverage base in the back end. Because again, one of the things about Philly, when you watch the offense, I'm going to say the word simple, right? It feels like they know that they're really talented, and they play like they're really talented. And so talented teams oftentimes are like, hey, we're going to line up in, this is the picture, right? It's like, hey, we're going to be in 2x2. We're going to be in solo with 2 tight ends and 2 receivers. There's not a lot of motion. It's not a lot of try to trick you. It's like, hey, this is what we're doing. And I think that, to me, is something that is beneficial, right? Because we're not going to be tests and rules. We're not going to be trying to bust pipes. It's really just our personnel is better than you. And as a defensive coordinator, the personnel issue is a big issue. But I do think it says, hey, like, we know we can play these coverage structures, and this is kind of what you're going to get out of these looks, right? They're going to pass when they spread it out. They're going to run when they bring the tight ends in. They might bring a little play action, but that's something every team does. So it's not like anything novel and different in those aspects. So that's something that really jumps out to me is like, take advantage of them being not overly complex. Like just kind of they're going to do what they're going to do. They're going to have a little wrinkle each week where it's like, hey, we're an empty a little bit more, and we're going to run. Like last week, they got an empty, right, with like basically 5 wide receivers, not 5 wide receivers, but a tight end, and then like Johnny Wilson, who's like a pseudo tight end for them, and they just ran like shallow cross, like which is a version of mesh. And they ran that exact formation, that exact play, probably 5 or 6 times, which is very unusual in the NFL for someone to run a play, come back to the same play with no augmentation in formation. So I think that's one thing that really jumps out to me is like, stop the run, play coverage, and just hope that your rules and the way you're presenting it are complex enough that you put Jalen Hurts in a spot. Because I will say this about Jalen Hurts, like he is not... right now doesn't appear to be overly confident throwing the football. Like there's a couple opportunities where they run like a fake bubble, kind of like that one where you pump it and the 2 receivers are up the seam, and there's dudes that are like wide open down the field. And I don't know what he's looking at. And again, everyone's talking about how effective he was as a passer, but he's not throwing the football down the field in these situations where you have an explosive play. And so I don't want to deal with Saquon Barkley. I don't want to deal with the offensive line from a run game standpoint. Let's put the ball in Jalen Hurts' hand as much as possible. So I'm thinking be aggressive on 1st and 2nd down, try to stay out of 3rd and short, 4th and short situations, and say, hey, man, Jalen Hurts, you have to beat us. And I know that sounds insane, but like it's now.
Look, Pittsburgh last week, yeah, okay, he looks confident. Are they back? He gets up there afterwards and he's like, oh, is that what y'all wanted to see after the whole week with him and A.J. Brown going back and forth? He threw for 108 yards 2 weeks ago. Like, he has not been good for the majority of this season. Now, as a passer, he's probably one of the 5 worst starting quarterbacks in the NFL, like pure passer. The problem with Jalen Hurts, if you're a defense, is he's not a pure pocket passer.
Right.
His ability as a scrambler, his ability as a runner, what they do with the tush push, like that makes him a top half quarterback in the league. He's that dangerous and dynamic at that stuff. But if they were having a pure pocket passing competition, and by the way, he's also pretty good throwing on the move. Like he'll find stuff, so he's super dangerous. Jalen Hurts is a good NFL quarterback. But if it was a pure pocket passing competition of you have to read it out, either a pure progression read or hey, pick a side read, whatever it is, the super high level quarterback stuff, like that's not his jam. He's a good thrower. He's super accurate, but he's actually figuring out where to throw is not his specialty. And we've talked about this every time that the Commanders have played Philly the last couple of years. He can do what he does at the extremely highly effective level that he can because their offensive line is so good. He and Lamar Jackson are tied for time to throw in the league. They both average 3.14 seconds to throw every single snap. I think Lamar's is probably a little inflated by the fact that sometimes he runs around for 7 seconds.
Right.
And that brings the average up. But like on a down in, down out basis, he's probably quicker than that. Jalen, I feel like, is much more like, no, that's kind of what he does.
Yeah.
The other big difference between Lamar and Jalen is Lamar has been sacked 21 times. Jalen has been sacked 38 times this year.
Yeah.
In 5 less pressures. So his ability to avoid that and just take a negative play has not been super elite this year. In fact, he's one of the bottom 10 quarterbacks in the league in taking sacks. So I think that's a relevant plot point as well. Like, can the Commanders actually get home on some of these, put them in some 2nd and long, 3rd and long, and then you avoid the vaunted 3rd and 4th and short where they're just going to push their way to a first down.
Well, I think you saw that in the first game, right? Like, he takes some sacks that he shouldn't take, like really poor sacks. He's scrambling out of the pocket. His people are right there. He takes a sack. It's like there's that trick play that they run. He takes a sack on the, what I'm saying? Like he took a lot of like negative plays early in that game, which to me is maybe the difference in the game early in the first half. There's one, or not maybe the difference, but one of the factors that kind of led to a very positive first half and a less productive second half for the Washington Commanders. So I don't know. I definitely think that to me is the crux of it, right? When you look across the offense, like I'm just going to read down their personnel. You got A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. You got Grant Calcaterra, who's their tight end, who's a pretty explosive player, but young player, developing. got Jordan Mailata right now, who's playing as the highest graded offensive lineman on PFF. Landon Dickerson, a Pro Bowl guard. Cam Jurgens is playing well. Mekhi Becton, Lane Johnson, Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley. Like, there's not a lot of chinks in this armor. So when you go down, or when you go down the list, you kind of say, what's the weakness? And to me, it jumps out as being Jalen Hurts. Because when you watch him on a down-to-down basis, and you mentioned it, right? He's devastating in the tush push, the quarterback runs, the ability to find explosive plays, like when he can do that, when he can extend the play, get out of the pocket. But he does take negative plays, and when you watch the film of him, right? When you watch him turn down open throws, when you watch him pull the football down and create pressure for the offensive line, like that's something that you have to maximize. So how do you do that? It's play different coverage structures, and can the rush get home? He's going to give you a shot. He's going to give you a shot for, it was really interesting. I was listening to something on Check the Mic, which is the 33rd Team's podcast about football. And they were talking about how the way that PFF is going to grade this game, there's going to be no pressures given up from the Pittsburgh game, even though there were 2 sacks. And it's like, why is that? And it's because Jalen Hurts is vacating and running into pressures that he shouldn't run into, which I think is a really valid point. So even if the rush isn't necessarily getting home and sinking in the way that they were versus New Orleans, he will give you 3 to 5 opportunities to do that. So can you, when that happens, capitalize on them? And in the first game, we were able to, especially in the first half to a certain extent. But now it's like, can you manufacture rushes? And you see one of the things that I think Joe Witt Jr. did so well in the New Orleans game was work on understanding when they play their double A, like, where's the slide going? It's probably going to go to 4. So that means Bobby's going to be on the back, and Bobby's going to win a rush on the back probably 9 out of 10 times. He's blitzing better than I've ever seen him blitz in his entire career. So can we find some stuff maybe where Saquon Barkley's got to protect, or Kenneth Gainwell's got to protect on Frankie Louvu and Bobby Wagner? That's a matchup for us, or maybe Jeremy Chin. And then it takes some of the onus off the 4-down lineman to win consistently. So I think that's the type of stuff you're looking at. Coverage structures, different blitz patterns. And again, like some of the stuff they've done this year from their AA stuff is really exciting. Different rush patterns, different rushers, really forcing the offensive line to identify different people. And again, this group's excellent, but sometimes a little change-up's all you need to get kind of a junk pressure. And I think that's what we're looking at here in this game. But I think maybe this is the point you made 5 points ago, is how are you efficient enough on 1st and 2nd down to make sure you have that opportunity to do that? And when you watch the second half of the Pittsburgh game, they just were like, oh, you're gonna try and be cute with us? Like, we're just gonna put this thing in 4-wheel drive and run 20 consecutive plays, do a couple of tush pushes, and you're never gonna touch the football again. And they're scary enough and strong enough and physical enough up front to get that done. And that's the thing that is like, yeah, all this cool 3rd down stuff, make Jalen Hurts win the game, great. Shoot, you gotta put the mouthpiece in, put the neck roll on, and win 1st and 2nd down to get those opportunities.
For sure. And here's a statistical way to describe the Jalen Hurts conundrum real quick. EPA per dropback's a stat we've mentioned on the show before. EPA stands for estimated points added. Things that really help your EPA, touchdowns, first downs, obviously estimated points added. A lot of points added on touchdowns. A lot of points added on first downs because you extend drives. Well, Jalen Hurts has over 1,000 less passing yards and half the touchdowns of Joe Burrow. Burrow this year has almost 4,000 yards. Hurts has 2,800. Burrow's 36 touchdowns, 8 picks. Hurts 18 touchdowns, 5 picks. They have the same EPA per dropback. The exact same, because Hurts so often converts in those really key 3rd down, 3rd and short, whatever situations. He comes up with clutch plays. And then, I guess this is EPA per dropback. That doesn't even count total EPA, because like EPA is a rusher. Think about, he's got, I think, 10 rushing touchdowns or something like that on the year. So he's really dangerous, but you got to take advantage of the opportunities that are given. Last thing I want to talk about real quick before we flip sides of the ball and see how Jayden Daniels can try to avenge what was maybe his worst game of the season. Certainly the offense's least productive game of the season the first time around against Philadelphia is some of the ways that Joe deployed personnel in the New Orleans game. And specifically, there's a couple times where Jeremy Chin, who, as we record this Thursday morning, we don't know if he's going to play. He's in the concussion protocol. He was out at practice running around a little bit yesterday. So he is ahead of Zach Ertz, but no guarantees that either one of them is going to be able to go on Sunday. But there were times that like he's covering a tight end, or there was the deep ball, like the post over the middle where he's covering Valdez-Scantling. And you're like, how is Jeremy Chin winding up one-on-one in man coverage against the number one receiver? And I'm just curious, like, how that process kind of goes as far as you know, because if I can pick one of my two safeties and it's Quan Martin, who played cornerback in college and played some cornerback last year, or Jeremy Chin, I would rather have Quan Martin in man coverage. Yet Quan is typically the safety over the top, and I get that too, because if I'd pick someone to play post safety out of those two, I'd pick Quan. But between Percy Butler, who I don't know whether he was a little banged up. He was in there late, but not as much. Derek Forrest, Quan Martin, Jeremy Chin. How do you think Joe is kind of deploying those guys? And you know, is that something where if I'm Philly's offensive coordinator, I see them get Valdez-Scantling on Jeremy Chin in man coverage, I'm like, oh, well, we're going to formation it the same way, and we're going to get A.J. Brown on Jeremy Chin, and let's have a party.
So basically they are in three safety personnel. And so in this look, think about Jeremy Chin is playing essentially like the will linebacker, or like the Buffalo linebacker if you want. And the reason they're doing that is because they're in 21 personnel. The Saints are in, right? And so I'm going to match personnel with people that I feel like can handle the run, right? And so I think Jeremy Chin playing the will is a really good matchup for us, right? I think, Forrest playing kind of the box safety is another really good matchup for us, especially in 21 personnel when you're trying to stop the run. And so they're not actually in man-to-man coverage. They're in a version of cover 3, at least to my eye. And so basically what's happening is you're running what would kill cover 3, right? You're running a vertical, you're running a switch release. So MVS is inside. I don't know who the outside receiver is, but he's running a vertical. He's attacking the seam. MVS goes outside. Chin has to carry that, and then when he breaks across the field, you've now attached both players, the safety, the post safety, and the corner, who are in thirds, to the vertical, and he's just working right underneath there, right? And so that's a really well-designed play. It's using, like, when you talk about offensive football, right? The personnel dictates your defensive personnel match. You're getting cover 3, and it's a perfect cover 3 beater. And so, to me, this isn't necessarily Jeremy Chin in man-to-man coverage. It's just a good play call. So, to your point about Philadelphia, one, they don't run a lot of 21 personnel. So, they're going to be in 12 way more. And when they're in 12, we would be in nickel or like big nickel or whatever they choose to be in, right? And so, they do a couple interesting personnel things. I'm talking about Philadelphia now. They have that kind of Johnny Wilson. Is he a tight end? Is he a receiver? They have 2 tight ends that they bring in. They have 13 personnel. So, you have to make designations about what you want to be in those situations from a secondary personnel standpoint. But I think this is they won't probably do this because there's not a lot of 21. Like this year versus 13, Joe Witt Jr. has been pretty good about saying, hey, we're going to stay in some type of nickel, right? In 12, we're going to stay in some type of nickel. And most teams now in the NFL do that because of the receiving threat that second tight end poses. So I think you're going to not be in this same coverage dilemma. Now, can you get them in issues with that? Sure. Like if you're going to play nickel to 13, like can you stop the run as well, right? Probably not. And if you think about the explosive runs that they had in the first game, they basically get into 12 or Big 12, Philly does, and they bring Johnny Wilson in as like a third tight end, and they just run the edge to the front side. They outside zone it, and Saquon Barkley cuts it back because you're kind of physically outmatched on the front side of that run. You're gapped out. So this is, again, where Philly becomes problematic, and it's not necessarily for the same reason New Orleans problematic, but like because of how well they run the football and because of how they do have kind of some eclectic personnel pieces on the perimeter, you kind of got to say to yourself, like, what do we want to be? Like, which is the poison we want to swallow? Is it that we're susceptible to plays like the one you described versus New Orleans, or are we susceptible to stopping the run? To me, I would probably say, like, let's stop the run and kind of live with the consequences, especially in 13 personnel. Like, Johnny Wilson is a rookie wide receiver, tight end kind of hybrid player. I'm not that worried about him. A.J. Brown's on the other side. the great thing about that is that we can now play some form of cover 6. We can kind of cloud that player with a 2 personnel, with like a cover 2 shell, like someone's going to press them, someone's going to be over the top, and we're going to play quarters to the front side, and we can fit that run real nice. And so maybe we do something like that. Maybe that's our just stock call versus that stuff. And we can get into a bigger personnel where Jeremy Chin is kind of the will linebacker in that look, and we feel good about it. But these are the decisions as a defensive coordinator you got to make, right? Which one is more scary to us? Is it the explosive play, or is it stopping the run? And versus New Orleans, I would say 100% in 21, stop the run, right? Because that's what they want to do with that personnel. And we'll live with the potential of an explosive play because we really like how we're playing our cover 3. Now they get stung here, and it hurts real bad. But, like Dan Quinn said the best thing to me in the game plan a couple weeks ago, you can't take everything away. You got to pick one thing to stop. So when you're playing the math, and I would agree with the math versus New Orleans, like when they were in 21, they ran the ball a ton. So let's make sure we can stop the run. And the coverage is going to suffer a little bit. And that's kind of the razor's edge you're going to be walking versus Philly. Because like you said, they have Jalen Hurts who does find explosive plays, and they can run the heck out of the football. So what's the solution going to be?
Great question. Joe Witt, up to you, sir. We'll review how it goes afterwards, of course, on Sunday. Make sure you join us live on the post-game show on YouTube at the Team 980, at 1067 The Fan, and at Craig Hoffman. And, of course, if you are a listener and you don't want to watch the show or can't join us live, it'll be in your podcast feed ASAP afterwards. But we're not done yet here on the preview edition because we got the offense to talk about. Take command, Craig Hoffman, Logan Paulson talking about the Commanders and Eagles this weekend. Jayden Daniels and the offense getting a second crack at an Eagles defense that really tripped them up in their first matchup. And we've talked about this. We don't need to belabor this point, but the Eagles defense is one of the most unique in football. It's the Fangio defense coached by Vic Fangio, and getting that for a rookie quarterback on 4 days rest was an impossible or near impossible task, and it showed up in the game. Some of the confusion that Jayden has not really experienced in other games this year was there in that one. But they've got a full week now. They're doing some different things offensively. Eagles are still playing at an extraordinarily high level. If you're Cliff Kingsbury going into this week, what are some of the high-level things that you're thinking about doing to unlock this defense in a way that you couldn't in the first matchup?
Yeah, so what I think is Jayden will do a little bit of that on his own. I think when you watch how he played versus New Orleans and you kind of see his understanding and his patience and how he trusted the protection and the ball delivery, there's a lot of really good stuff that makes me think, hey, he's kind of the arms back. He's got the zip, the snap on it that we saw earlier in the season. So some of those tight window throws, he'll be able to get the ball there when it needs to get there. So I think a little bit of that will be taken care of. I think the other thing is finding ways specifically, and I know this is not like a novel concept because everybody in the NFL needs to do this, is how do you account for Zach Bond underneath, and really Cooper DeJean, like those two underneath hook players, like how do you account for them? Because one of the things about Zach Bond and, Nakobe Dean to a certain extent, but he's more of like the run kind of downhill type player, is very rarely have I seen a linebacker cover so much ground underneath. Like I think it's the first drop back in the or maybe the second drop back of the Philly game that the Commanders had. They're running like a spot concept. So, sit by number 1, corner by number 2, the back runs to the flat. And the way that they run it, you're like, oh, yeah, throw the ball to the flat because they're playing their man, like their single high, a version of man. Maybe it's match, but the middle linebacker's relating to the back. So, the back should be wide open. Zach Bond, he is in a bad leverage position, runs that down and makes the tackle. The first third down, they're trying to manipulate Zach Bond on a crosser with a dig in behind it. And Jayden, I think, makes the right decision, but Zach Bond does such a great job of getting depth and then weaving, almost like a DB, underneath the go and getting his hand on it and knocking it down. You remember the throw to Noah Brown? And yeah. So how do you account for that guy, really? Because another thing is, when they're in their quarters match, he's got a person that he's, matching or that he's playing man coverage on. But what they also do a really good job of, it's if the back's protecting or if the back's away or if the back's chipping, he does an awesome job of being I'm getting depth right now. and kind of getting into the coverage and clouding windows. So it almost kind of plays like an extra plug player. So to me, obviously, like they've got great corners. Quinyon Mitchell is doing a great job. Darius Slay is playing at a high level. Though you see good corners, right? They've got good safeties. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and Reed Blankenship. Those guys are doing a great job. But the thing that seems to make this come to life is how Bond, like who I just talked about, and Cooper DeJean can kind of play these underneath spots, and I can carry a receiver vertical on the post, like in the quarters, right? A normal flat player, like when I run that wheel, he's going to carry that, and they're fast enough and athletic enough to do that. And then, hey, when I don't have work, I'm going to cloud throwing windows. And so what is your solution to that? And so obviously, like the number one thing that comes to mind for me is like, how do you manipulate these guys with play action, right? Because Nakobe Dean, Zach Bond, not only are they good coverage players, but they've been excellent in terms of stepping up to the run. So can you get those, like, again, they're like dogs with bones, right? They're like ready to go. They're juiced up. Can you get them in the line of scrimmage? And then can we get something in behind them? Can we manipulate so for example, they also play this like when you're in a 3-by-1, so 3 receivers to the offensive right, 1 receiver to the left, back off step to the left, they man that up. And so can you get a player as the running back matched up on a linebacker in Zach Bond and win that one-on-one matchup, whether it's a choice, whether it's a vertical, because that's something in their quarter shell, that safety who's to that 2 receiver side is going to push to the 3 receiver side, and they're going to play 5-over-3 over there, and you're going to have 2-on-2. So, like, can you win isolation basketball? Like, those are some things. Like, how do you account for that player? And he's playing really well. Like, he jumps off the tape. But to me, he's the guy that makes it kind of come to, like, they're all playing well, but he's the guy that really gives it that extra little bit of edge. So how do you handle him, and how do you kind of keep him from just like literally like dog off the leash to football and flooding zones?
So that challenge becomes way harder this week if Zach Ertz is not available.
Oh, yeah.
Because he is one of your key players in those areas. Someone that if you can get the matchup on, a Zach Bond, like can Zach Ertz manipulate him? Probably. Zach Ertz can manipulate anyone. Just that old man, dark route running. Haven't said that one in a while. Another guy that you'd think about doing that is Austin Eckler. He's
100%.
not available either. So that is definitely a huge, huge detriment for Washington. And I wonder, do they put Olamide Zaccheaus in the backfield in some of the Eckler roles and like try to get him matched up, or Jamison Crowder back there? So these are some of the options. But the other big one that I think is the biggest change for the Commanders' offense since the first matchup is they are moving Terry around way more. And this kind of emanates from that first matchup. The Dallas game was the straw that broke the camel's back, but I know it's something that they were thinking about after that Philadelphia game. The first time around, where Quinyon Mitchell was just able to sit on Terry the entire time, they were able to double Terry a lot and just say, hey, not only do we have one of the best young corners in football playing at a really high level, but like we're going to have a safety lurking because we know where he's going to be. And why would we not? Because they don't have anyone else that can really hurt us. And since then, and especially last week off the bye, Terry's moving around way more, like getting close to like a 60-40 split of wide left versus wide right. Same thing. He's moving around in and out of the slot on both sides of the field. I think they put him in motion more last week than they have in any other game this season. So how can that dynamic, knowing like they're going to not fully like Justin Jefferson 18 targets spam Terry, but they're going to get Terry 7 to 10 targets and they're going to move him around a lot more. How does that change the dynamic against this particular defense?
Yeah, and I just want to like make a point of like clarification, because like even though they were able to kind of like seemingly, I'm going to say quote unquote double Terry, a lot of it is just how they play their coverages, right? So to me, it's like, everyone says, oh, they're doubling Terry. It's like, no, that's just quarters, right? Like that's just quarters. He's just there. There's 2 players there. Or hey, they double him on the slant. It's like, no, that's like that's the hook player underneath. Like that's like how they play their coverage. So to me, it comes down to how do you get Terry in the spots where you want him in the route concept, specifically against this defense, because you can with motions and stuff kind of stress zones, and they do. Like, so for example, like let's say we're in 2-by-2 and I bring the slot receiver across, the corner is going to take the outside most person. Let's say it's just quarters for them, like 4 across the back. Think about your Madden, right? That underneath hook player can be Zach Bond on essentially what amounts to your number 1 wide receiver to that side. So that's a matchup that I want. And I want to manipulate that as much as possible. Even on the backside there, like, so for example, like in that look we're talking about, you motion the receiver across, that tight end on the backside now to the nub side away from the through receiver side, the corner stays on that guy, right? And he'll take him in man-to-man coverage. So that, I've already manipulated this the way that I want. I want a corner on a tight end because that is a bad matchup for me offensively, but I'm going to get a better draw somewhere else. So where and how can I, with this motion, say, I want Terry in this spot because after this motion, if they're in quarters, I'm going to get Zach Bond or Cooper DeJean or Nakobe Dean on him, and I trust that matchup, right? And again, quarters is tough because it's going to almost play like a bracket, but like imagine if I ran a choice and we've vacated the zone and it's on an underneath hook player. And again, those underneath hook players really make the defense go, in my opinion. But can you win that matchup? I would think yes, even if it's just a slant, right? And so that's stuff that I would kind of say, like, how do we do that stuff, right? And I think it's going to be tough. They're good underneath, like we just talked about. Like, that's what really makes the defense go. But if I can get Terry on a linebacker or on a nickel, that's one that I want to kind of put my money on, right? Maybe he wins it 7 out of 10 times, but I'm going to take that, right? I want to take that opportunity and see if we can get them out of the stuff they want to do and say, hey, you can't sit in your quarters all the time. You got to get something different. You're going to have to play a little bit more man. You're going to have to be more matchup driven here. You can't just kind of do your normal bump it off and get stuff where you want to get it. And I will say too, I've seen a couple times, because of how aggressive Bond and Dean are specifically in the middle of the field, they've motioned to like 4 receiver sets and brought the back out, and they've just straight up dropped the tight end. So, like, those are things you can do. It's just the ultimate trump card in all of this is, you drop the tight end, but the quarterback's still getting sacked because we've got 5 out in the route and we don't have a good enough protection up. And that's where this is so good because they understand. It's like, imagine there's like a completion map, like red zones where the offense completes the ball a lot. The linebackers almost seemingly intuitively know where that is, and they'll just drop their coverage or drop their match responsibility and flood those red zones, and the quarterbacks can't get to number 2 in time, and there's a sack. So I think that's the thing about this. Yeah, you can do a lot of cool stuff. You can find good matchups versus defense, but you don't always have time because the rush is so good to execute those matchups in the way that you want, or exploit those matchups in the way that you want.
Yeah, and you saw examples of Cliff being able to do this with Terry last week. Even they lined him up in the slot a couple times against quarters for the Saints, and it winds up becoming a quasi man-to-man against a safety. And like, one of the big completions in the game was this big deep out. Was it bench? Was it a corner? One of those like,
corner
at 18 yards, depending on how you take the angle, you're going out. And Terry gets a 25-yard gain pretty easily on Tyrann Mathieu in that scenario. So like, they've shown the ability to do this, and you'd have to think that they're going to do that the best they can against Philly. The other way to get some good plays, some bigger plays against this team that, of all people, Bryce Young showed a couple of weeks ago, is to extend a little bit. Now, obviously, you have to survive the pressure, which you've already hinted is pretty difficult. Jalen Carter literally plays every snap, and he plays every snap hard, and he's really, really good. They have a rotation of edges that are really good and kind of a mix of skill sets. Josh Sweat, Nolan Smith, all those dudes.
Jalix Hunt, right? All these guys that have some pass rush juice and upside for sure.
So, but Bryce was able to extend some plays in that Carolina game where Carolina almost beat Philadelphia and was able to find some plays down the field. How do we feel about Jayden's ability to do that? We've talked about how his pocket movement and sometimes extending isn't actually his thing for as mobile as he is. Like he'll get out and just try to run, and sometimes the lane he takes can actually invite pressure. So how do we feel about his ability to do that against this Eagles team?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I was thinking about last night when I was watching the film, I was like, because that's not really Jayden's, coup de grace. That's not his best thing, is like extending to find plays downfield the same way like, vintage Russell Wilson used to do, right? For example, or the way Josh Allen does. Like he's extending to become a runner usually. But you can call plays specifically off of like boot action that I think would be really good in terms of breaking that and kind of forcing him to be an extender. And so what I mean by that is, so think about some of the plays. that they ran last week with, him and where he's taking those sacks, where he's running. It's what essentially would amount to be a naked, right? Like he's running out. There's no protector there. That he's one-on-one with the defensive end, and he's reading a 3-level throw. So when I was with Kyle, when I was in Atlanta, when this is kind of your default setting here, is instead of having it be a naked, you bring a tight end and maybe a running back to that side. They double team the defensive end with eyes to the strong safety. And if the safety blitzes, they would block him. But you boot Jayden out, and then all of a sudden now you've broken the protection rules, right? And so there's no contain player. He's broken the contain of the defense, and he has more time, hypothetically, to read a deep crosser, and again, that would break it. So, for example, think about on a keeper, you're bringing, one short, one high, and then someone's running a go, for example. But what if that go runs a post now, right? And can really get behind the defense because we've broken contain, we've given him an opportunity to get into that 2.7 kind of time frame to throw the football, and he can just arm punt that thing down the field. And think about, Robert Griffin in 2012 throwing to Robinson deep on the post versus Dallas, right? It's that same type of play. Heavy play action, I'm kind of vacating the pocket. All of a sudden, because the time parameters change, those shots and explosive plays become more relevant down the field, and you can hit them. And I think that's something that I would kind of look at is, are there ways to tweak our protections, tweak some of our boots in terms of kind of making a pseudo pocket, outside the hash almost, that would allow him to kind of push the ball down the field in a way that he wasn't able to the first game because he was just setting up in the pocket all the time.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at the heat map from the first game, and it's interesting as well because they did take a couple of deeper shots in this game. They had 4 throws, 20-plus yards down the field, 5 throws, 6 throws, but anything 25-plus yards was all to the right side. So, how to replace Noah Brown. Can they get Terry over there? I think some of the personnel questions become interesting as well, no matter who is, is Jayden throwing on time? Is he extending? Whatever. And I think that, to that point, KJ Osborne being in this week, it should be an upgrade on some of the blocking stuff in the run game. Some of those intricate, details that we talked about with Luke McCaffrey, perhaps Osborne's in some of those spots. I wonder if Zach Ertz is out, if we see a lot more Jamison Crowder on some of those type of routes. But
do you become an 11 team all of a sudden because Zach's out?
Hilariously, what about becoming a 10 team at times? Yeah. Cliff, for all the talk of oh my God, are they going to try to run the air raid? Cliff, man, go back into your bag, bro. Go back to your college days. Let's run a little bit of 10. But I also think I can't remember who I was having this conversation with. But it might have been you. It might have been Kine. It might have been someone else. I talk about this team way too much. But we were talking about how it feels like they just have a bunch of good zone wide receivers, and it's not necessarily a bunch of guys that can win man to man. And that timing and that understanding of how to manipulate zones, when to sit down, it's harder against Philly because they're better at playing zone than anyone else. But that is kind of the thing this week. And then the last piece that I'll ask from a personnel standpoint is Ben Sinnott obviously is going to be getting some more run. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily know if there's a super high trust with him to run all these different routes and all this kind of stuff. The thing that Ben Sinnott probably is good at right now at NFL level is, can you get the ball in his hands and let him run over people? Yeah. And so are there ways that they can, kind of do some of the stuff you talked about earlier where hey, can we get him to drop a tight end, have that tight end be Ben Sinnott, throw him the ball, and then say, hey, Ben, run. Those are some of the things that I'm, on top of all the big picture stuff that we just talked about. And then there's one other big thing, the run game. We'll get to that in a second. Those are some of the smaller personnel level things that I'm kind of thinking about going into Sunday. No,
I think that's 100% because you're getting to a point now where we're kind of we're in a less than ideal situation. And what I mean by that is I don't think this is we've talked about how there's a lack of general top end talent, but I think all these guys are good football players. I think Ozzy's been a great ad. Jamison Crowder as a number 3 is awesome. Terry's done a great job this year. But now all of a sudden we're getting guys in roles that they haven't been before, right? So you mentioned Ben Sinnott, and everyone's just have Ben Sinnott do what Zach does. And I'll tell you right now, just watching the New Orleans game, watching stuff from training camp, watching this season, what Zach is doing is very unique And again, it's one of the reasons he's probably going to be in the Hall of Fame, right? Because his ability to, like the dark arts, understand leverages, understand position, stems, and get to space and be friendly to the quarterback. And that takes time to develop that. So you bring up a great point there with Ben. You can't just say, oh, run Zach stuff, because it's not going to be effective and you're throwing away 10 plays, which you don't want to do. So what are the plays that work for Ben? You know, he's a nice vertical route runner. He can get into the defense. He can run corners. He can run posts. He can run screens. Is there a package of stuff that allows him to do that? Like, for example, we just talked about the boot, the half roll out of the pocket. New Orleans ran one of those, and they ran it to the tight end, and the Washington Commanders completely dropped the tight end on a deep post. And if the protection had held up, like if the two tight ends were able to block Fowler, that's a touchdown for sure. So I know Ben can run that. I know he's fast enough and he can adjust the football. Like, is there a way to kind of manufacture something like that for him in the offense? 100%. You mentioned Osborne. Like, I think I loved Osborne in Minnesota. I like what he does from a run game standpoint. Like, is he a true 2? Probably not. But and Cliff's done a great job of this all season, is how do we maximize what he does well? And I think that's where we're getting a little bit of kind of murkier water, because now we got a bunch of people. We got Luke, we got Ben, we got Osborne, we got OZ, we got Crowder.
Diami,
and it's like, Diami. It's like, what is the best usage for these guys? And that's where it gets hard. And you saw it on the sack that the Commanders took, or Jayden took, in the low red on that 3rd and 1 on the boot. It's like you're getting guys doing stuff that they don't do all the time. And so that's where it becomes a little bit challenging. I think that's where Cliff's got to earn his paycheck this week, and that can be stressful. And I've been a part of teams where there's been a little bit of an injury bug at the top, and it really limits, not from a talent standpoint, but just from an execution standpoint, and because they just haven't had as many reps at it. So that's going to be something that, again, to your initial point, 3 points ago, like, how do we get Terry in, if not the first spot, the second spot, as much as we possibly can, because that's a really nice way to offset some of that, because he's done it all, right? So, and Jayden has a good rapport with him, and Jayden doesn't have to build that rapport with.
He trusts him. He'll let it rip to Terry in a way that he won't to other guys.
And so I think that's something where it's like, that's why that's going to be so important this week, is that element, because again, everyone else is going to be fine, but you need some of that playmaking spark, and how do we get Terry involved in more of that?
So the last piece, which maybe should have gone first, is the run game.
Yeah.
Brian Robinson was out in the first matchup. That 100% played a huge role in that game. So can Washington get the run game going? Obviously, the offensive line is going to be just rearing to go because of how badly they played last time out. We assume that Biotish will be back and everyone else is good. Like, these guys are going to want revenge for their last performance. Can they get it against a very good Philadelphia front?
Yeah, and I think this is going to be something where you say, what hurt us in the last matchup? Because I actually thought they were able to run their GT a little bit, had some success, went back and watched the runs last night, and you're like, oh, that's a nice little pop there. Good job by B-Rob on a Wanda. Like, there's some good stuff here. And then you kind of get in deeper into the cut, and you're like, oh, Jalen Carter's winning this one-on-one on a back block, and it blows up the GT, or he's penetrating on a bounce, and it's getting blown up in the backfield. So I think what I would say, to maximize your runs, where is that dude lining up? And can you dictate where he is lining up? And then once you've done that, can we make sure? So, for example, everyone says you want to run away from good defenders, for example. Sometimes you want to double team them. Like, if you want to run GT and you can get Bates in there and you can get a double team on the 3 technique and really get after it, and Bates has got to mash that DN, and that's a tough matchup in itself, but maybe that's the way to do it. If he's going to play the 3 to the tight end, let's get that double team nice and set there. Let's run whams. Let's run traps. Let's make it hard for him to be the penetrating 3 technique that he can be. So, dictating formation, where is he? Can we account for him? And then also, how do we get him to be a little bit less aggressive up the field, right? So when we do get a counter, and he is the 3 technique to that side, and we do have a back flock, he goes and he gives you a little bit of hesitation. We get hands on, we're able to pop it out the front side. I think that's going to be a huge thing. And I think also another element too, and I think Cliff did a pretty good job with this in the first game, but can you build off of it, is the misdirection for Bond and for Dean. Because when you watch the Pittsburgh game, Pittsburgh's like, hey, we're going to run duo, we're going to run inside zone, we're not super tricky, we're not even going to run a lot of power, and those dudes are so fast to trigger downhill. and they're peeling double teams to get in the backfield. Can you put them in a little bit of consternation, right? So those are the things that I would say from the first matchup that need to be addressed. Because everyone says, oh, Jordan Davis, good player, he's a good player. Milton Williams, good player, is a good player. But those are all players you can deal with and you can handle. Like, it's really Jalen Carter and the linebackers and how you handle them. And so, misdirection, where's Jalen Carter on every play? Do we want to double him? Do we want to trap him? Do we want to wham him? Make him think. Because I do think if you can get him off his game a little bit, it becomes a little bit more porous in there. And you watch, for example, the Carolina game, and their guards are really physical. They're able to kind of move them off the spot. There's some creases. And again, they didn't run the ball super effectively, but they ran the ball effectively enough. So I think if you say, hey, can we get to like a baseline efficiency here, stay on schedule, get to those second and sixes, second and sevens, so we're not kind of way behind the eight ball like we were in the first game, taking tackles for losses and all those different things. This looks a little bit different. And that's really going to be, to me, the story of this game is, can this team find a way to run the football? Because we just talked about, Jayden and all the stuff he's got to deal with. It's so much easier for him to throw, take shots if you have heavy play action, right? Heavy ball fake, get them downhill, get those linebackers up near the line of scrimmage, create a little space in the middle of the defense. That only happens, to me, versus this team if you are committed and effective at running the football. So can you win one-on-ones, and can you elevate this group? Those are things that, again, this is why those coaches make a lot of money, because it's going to be hard, but finding a way to get that done is going to be a huge deal.
As we rounded up the defense segment with a good luck Joe. Good luck, Cliff. We'll see how it goes on Sunday. We'll see you after the game live from Northwest Stadium, probably around 5:30 once we're done in the locker room. So join us there, probably about halftime of the late games. Flip on over on your smart TV or pull us up on your phone, your tablet, YouTube at Team 980, at 1067 The Fan, or at Craig Hoffman. And we are live talking about Commanders and Eagles. And then we'll be back. We're actually, even though Christmas is next Wednesday, as far as I know, unless Logan's about to tell me otherwise as soon as I hit stop recording, we're on a regular schedule next week because Christmas is on a Wednesday. And we got stuff to do Tuesday and we got stuff to do Thursday. So we'll see you on a regular schedule ahead of Sunday Night Football, Falcons at Commanders next weekend. So busy time of year, obviously. A lot of important football, and it is good to have some important football for the right reasons in December. For Logan, I'm Craig. We'll see you next time on Take Command.